Hola, hola, hola. Buenas noches. ¿Se escucha todo esto? Hola, ¿sí? Súper. Bueno, buenas noches. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas por venir. Organiza la primera vez de uno que venga al CEAC. Este es el Centro de Estudios de Arquitectura Contemporánea de la Universidad Torcuato Di Tella. Hoy iniciamos nuestras actividades públicas de este semestre. Mi nombre es Javier Agustín Rojas. Hoy estamos en una semana de lujo para la escuela y para el CEAC. Estamos a mitad de camino de nuestro taller de invierno, que es un taller vertical que atraviesa a todos los alumnos de la escuela. Y este semestre está comandado por Padmanabhan, que me brindará una conferencia el viernes, con la asistencia de Céline Bessire y de Jacob Hoffner. Antes de presentar a Céline, introducirlos un poquito en la conferencia de hoy, me gustaría invitarlos al resto de las actividades de la semana. Mañana va a estar presentando su trabajo Jacob, también a las 19 horas. Y el viernes tendremos la clausura de este taller con la conferencia de Thomas y con una exhibición de todos los trabajos que se realizaron esta semana y un brindis posterior. Como siempre, estas actividades del CEAC son todas abiertas, así que si quieren invitar a otros colegas, amigos, estudiantes, son siempre bienvenidos. Hoy también estamos iniciando las actividades del segundo semestre. Esta es la agenda que vamos a tener por los próximos meses hasta diciembre. Estuvimos trabajando mucho los últimos meses en toda la escuela para diversos proyectos. Me gustaría contárselas. Como siempre está disponible en la web, en Instagram, en mailing y demás. En estos días va a estar impresa. Originalmente la conferencia de Thomas iba a ser el sábado, que estaba anunciado, pero el partido de River, eso se adelanta el viernes, desafortunadamente, y bueno, espero que lleguemos con este póster nuevo. Bueno, vamos a tener muchas conferencias magistrales de invitados internacionales este semestre. Para nosotros en el CEAC es muy importante presentarnos como una plataforma de discusión de prácticas contemporáneas, tanto locales como internacionales, a través de este formato de conferencia magistral con espacio para preguntas y respuestas. En ese sentido vamos a recibir a Luis Rojo. Luis Rojo es un arquitecto español que estará brindando una conferencia el jueves que viene. Es socio del estudio Rojo Fernández Shaw, pero también es director de los proyectos de tesis de la maestría de proyecto en la ETH. Es crítico, creo que es un personaje en una posición muy interesante entre la academia, la crítica y la práctica. Y va a estar bueno poder conocerlo y escucharlo. La semana siguiente vamos a recibir a Matthias Winter en un convenio que tenemos con el Instituto Francés y la Embajada de Francia. Matthias Winter vendrá como parte del programa en Arquitectura de Paisaje que tenemos en la escuela, que dirige Ignacio Flerking. Lucas es un paisajista joven, trabajó muchos años en la oficina de Bas Metz, un paisajista belga. La práctica de él tiene muchos proyectos de investigación, es una práctica joven, con pocos proyectos construidos bastante radicales, así que bueno, a los que les interese el paisajismo, los invito a esa charla. Después, la última conferencia de ese mes, que es la de Baucu, el 29, vamos a recibir a dos socios del estudio italiano Baucu, a Pier Paolo Tamburelli y a Giacomo Suma. Esta creo que va a ser una de las ocasiones más especiales del semestre, no solo por la práctica de Baucu, que es uno de los estudios italianos más relevantes del presente, sino por todo el trabajo académico y editorial de Tamburelli, con la revista San Rocco, con sus libros sobre historia de arquitectura. Creo que es otro personaje muy importante para conocer y escuchar. Bueno, en el resto del semestre Pancho Liernur va a estar presentando su nuevo libro, que es un poco la continuación de la conferencia que dio el año pasado en el ciclo El trabajo de los demás, sobre otredad y canon. En octubre vamos a lanzar la segunda exhibición de este año, titulada Recuerdos del futuro. Esta es una exhibición que estamos desarrollando con el archivo de ETH Arquitectura, Es un proyecto liderado por Sabine Kastner, profesora de tesis, que está... se escucha mejor ahí. Profesora de tesis, que está aquí con nosotros, y Gonzalo Yerba, también profesor de proyecto de la escuela. Esta exhibición va a salir en conjunto con el segundo número de la DTA, la revista de Arquitectura, y va a estar dedicada a arquitectura argentina de 1970. Nos parece que en esa década truncada por el proceso militar hay una serie de proyectos públicos y de gran escala y una gran conjunción de temas de sociología, de tecnología, como lo volvió a ver en el país. La revista va a hacer hincapié en unos 10 proyectos, o creo que más, 19, viene bien. Y todo lo que no logramos incluir en la revista va a ir a la exhibición, básicamente, ¿no? Estamos recibiendo muchas donaciones nuevas en el archivo de la arquitectura. Creo que ETH, no sé si está esta semana, se recibieron algunas cosas nuevas de Justo Solsona. Se van a exponer planos inéditos de Miguel Ángel Roca, ¿de quién más? De Egoscue, de Shaura Urgel, que tiene una gran preeminencia en la exhibición. Creo que va a ser un hecho súper importante este semestre. Y después, para terminar, el último mes tendremos 3 conferencias de 3 prácticas fundamentales del panorama internacional. Una será de Felipe Magallanes, de Fala Atelier. El trabajo de Fala para nosotros es muy relevante para poder ver cómo se puede construir un proyecto de oficina y un aporte o un diálogo con el lenguaje de la arquitectura desde una muy temprana edad. Es una oficina portuguesa que con encargos ordinarios y muy simples lograron tener un diálogo y ponerse en conversación con muchos temas, y creo que va a ser muy motivante poder ver eso. Después nos va a visitar Kirsten Gers de la oficina que tiene junto a David Van Severen, y en noviembre vamos a terminar con una presentación de Wone X, fundador de productora y también fundador de Liga, Espacio para la Arquitectura, un espacio de exhibición en México donde muchos profesores de esta escuela han exhibido su trabajo, y bueno, creo que con esa partida doble va a estar buenísimo terminar el año con Wone. Bueno, ahora sí, switching to English. I'm sorry for the long conversation. The long introduction. Today's lecture by Céline will be in English. I would like to introduce her formally. Céline is an architect and a magíster from the ETH, the Politécnica School of Zurich. In 2017, she founded Delphi, an independent architecture magazine. And since 2019, she runs the office Bessire Winter alongside Matthias Winter. They have received several awards from the Solothurn, Canton, and the Swiss Art Award in 2024. She has taught at Zurich with Tom Emerson, and she's currently an assistant professor with Thomas and Oliver Luchtens. And she has also taught at Lucerne, at the University of Arts and Applied Science. I think I'm not forgetting anything, or perhaps a lot. But before handing the mic to her, I'd like to invite Thomas to make a comment, because we are really happy to have this team for the winter workshop. When we started organizing this, and Thomas was a little bit sad that his partner couldn't join because of holidays and the schedule and so on. We had this wonderful idea to bring along his team, Jacob and Céline. They all teach together at Zurich. So we are having this experience of welcoming teachers. You know, we are always seeing architects and talking about their practice, but now it's like we have this troupe of teachers that they get along so well together. And when he had this idea, we said, okay, we want to know more. His teachers are great, and we decided to have this space of lectures, of just not finding out just about the big names and wonderful architects, but also about the emerging and the ones who are developing other lines of works, or even the ones we didn't know before. So thank you, Céline, and Thomas. It's be nice to hear a few words from you.
Well, first of all, I have to thank you, Céline and Jacob, for coming here, for joining, for creating that great team. Thank you so much.
It's really shouting. It's better now.
This said, I would like to address you, students, why I think it's amazing that you get a lecture by Céline this evening. And the reason is very simple. When you witness the emergence, the beginning of a new voice in architecture, you witness the emergence of a new sensibility. And what is a new sensibility? Is it a new way of feeling? Is it a new way of making? Is it a new way of confronting reality as an architect? Maybe it's a bit of all of that. And the exciting thing is when you see the work like Céline's and Matthias, you have to look very closely because you feel something new is emerging, but we still do not know exactly what it is. What is the promise that lies in the work, you know? And that's so fascinating because you're looking at a process, you're looking at an open end. And I think that's why I like to invite you to open your eyes very wide and your ears to see what Céline is going to tell us and show us today. Thank you, Céline.
Is this working? No? Is it working? Can you hear me? Yeah? No?
¿Se escucha al fondo?
Hello, hello? Yes? No? It's not working. What am I doing? Yes. Can you hear me now? Yes? Better?
¿Mejor o más o menos? We start with this and the guy is going to turn the volume from the console in a minute.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna start shouting. No? So, yes, thank you so much. First of all, also thank you, Javier, for the introduction. And then also thank you, Thomas, for all the opportunities you have given me so far. I'm really, really thankful. And I'm super thankful to be able to talk about the work we do in Bessire Winter with my partner together, with Matthias Winter. So I'm gonna be talking a lot in the beginning. You can lean back and relax, but I promise it's gonna be very fast and fun later. So, can you hear me? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, good. Amazing. So, metaMorphologies. metaMorphologies is about how things can take shape and also about what shapes things. It is about form and about transformation. The prefix meta renders morphology or form as something non-static and non-hermetic. It refers to in-betweenness or beyondness. So metaMorphology speculates on an architecture that goes beyond the creation of consolidated objects, an architecture that is capable of re-establishing a dialogue within the city. We've actually been talking about this this morning a lot. metaMorphologies is about the shift towards a transformative understanding of architecture as a tool to create relationships, complexity, and coexistence. We live in a pre-normalized, pre-regulated and pre-formalized time, which all of a sudden has to become receptive for change, for gestures of showing alternatives, for optimistic experiments, in order to provoke some sort of evolution and change. And I believe that this is reason for absolute euphoria. When we think about norms and change, like technological change, economic change, any change in society actually, in the 20th and the 90th and 20th century, there was a working selection mechanism which allowed you to see whether something is good or bad. Good was progressive or in line with modernization. Bad was equal to regressive or archaic. So this binary modern value system, good versus bad, culture versus nature, the subject versus the object, has led us all, as we know today, into some quite dead ends on various levels. So right now, this testing system does not work anymore because modernization is no longer the key to good or bad. As Bruno Latour says, we don't have a testing system for the definition of techniques going in one direction or the other. It is very difficult to define a regressive or progressive direction for any technique or innovation per se, because we can barely envision all possible and also all impossible after effects and also after forms of that certain innovation. And I'm quoting Rem Koolhaas here when he says, change has been divorced from the idea of improvement. There is no progress. Like a crab on LSD, culture staggers endlessly sideways. End of quote. The collapse of this binary and also restrictive value system opens up new ways of thinking about change. We start to understand change as a circular movement. Things appear and they reappear, which is fundamentally the principle of recycling. All knowledge is already produced. Today's time is about its application. So metaMorphologies is about exploring ways of thinking that embrace the decay of an aging value system, that exceeds the individual happening and the notion of singularity. It is about reversing conventional patterns and common chronology of thought. It is about carefully looking and about outrageous speculations on how to engage with space differently. In troubled times, we have chosen our point of entry as an embracing of the full complexity of what we inherit from an ending era. In our case, it's the era of clear opinions, limiting taxonomies, rigid categories. And I think this is physically, spatially, ideologically, materialistically, economically. Our context and also our complexity is the generic Swiss city. You see Luzern in the image, which is norms, standards, residential constructions, front gardens, leftover spaces. It's really much about regulations and also, of course, the economic reality. But when we look twice and when we learn, as Donna Haraway said, and before it was Hannah Arendt who said the same, when we relearn thinking, we discover qualities and surprises in between all these binary oppositions. And we understand again that, quote, we have never been modern. Sorry. I think it's because you made it a laser pointer. Oh. Sorry. Thank you. You're welcome. In this trailer for the design studio we are teaching in Luzern, we try to rethink the relationship between the house and the city, inside, outside, architecture and landscape, and proposed an architecture of joining, which goes beyond perimeter lines, beyond the object. Yet the contemporary Swiss city and its architecture is composed of these singular objects, no more monuments, no more axes, no more symmetries, no continuum, but instead fragmentation, parcelization, privatization, and atomization. Today it seems that the only certainty is narrowed down to a single point. But always optimistic, we find our scope of action in the singular house as an object and the rooms within. In this context, I think it's really interesting to look at the writing of Georges Perec and how he manages to reveal a kind of freedom within the boredom of our everyday spaces, and how he manages also to reverse this crisis of determinism. In Espèce d'Espace, Perec shows, and that's already 50 years ago, the degree of opacity our everyday life has on spaces, how our ever-repeating actions actually disguise the space in which they take place, and how everyday life acts as a form of anesthesia. But then he goes on, and he starts to set these pieces of spaces in relation to each other. He, for example, describes the kinship of the broom closet with the living room. In the broom closet, we put the vacuum cleaner, and in the living room, we put our exhausted bodies. So both spaces refer to the same notion of recovery and maintenance. By looking for similarities, suddenly rooms start to change their meaning, because we change the way we look at them. By describing and relating these mostly very boring spaces, Perec also starts to deform them and introduces a possible transformation. So the way we describe things, or the way we depict things, obviously changes the way we understand them. And this has the power to actually change reality, to create relationships and proximities where there were none before. All of a sudden, we could draw a line between two different species, as you see on the left, or two different species of spaces, as it is the case on the right in Colin Rowe's analysis of the ideal villa, relating Le Corbusier to the architecture of Palladio. And we can recognize one as the metamorphoses of the other. Through morphing on the left and transcription on the right, traditional components can be dismantled. Common features can be discovered, which are below the surface of their appearance. And it is the case, as it is the case in Moretti's studies of spaces and sequences. Moretti is not only translating the spatial sequence of the Palazzo Thiene into mathematical Euclidean geometry, but he is also liberating space from meaning. And we've also, I'm just thinking about what we've been talking about Duchamp in the beginning of the workshop. He treats spaces as containers, revealing a kind of meta qualities of these spaces. They start to act like anagrams, an anagram being a word, formed by rearranging the letters of a different word, like heart and earth, for instance. So we can understand metamorphology, the evolution of form and figure, as something inherently present within the architectural process of building and constructing, because we change matter. We demolish, we manipulate, we distort. All of it is physical. It is transformation of really tangible matter. Sometimes these physical manipulations are fantastic because they are illusionary and because they cannot be understood at a first glance. This is the smile of Ramses in Luxor, which is only perceived as a smile once you view his head from the same elevation as his lips. Viewed from the ground level below, the smile appears as a straight line due to perspective distortion, so the pharaoh had to smile in order not to smile. The same strategy has, for instance, also been applied by the Greeks through the entasis. distorting the perfection of their columns so that they would appear to be perfect. Yet the perception of our built environment and physical landscape remains to be not only a visual construct, but first and maybe foremost also a mental construct. On the left, you see a Hodler painting, one of those illustrations that tremendously shaped the way we look at and also tend to romanticize Swiss landscape. On the right side, you see the photograph of an actual landscape, physically signed by the artist Hamilton Finlay with F. Hodler. The signature appropriates the view and elevates its meaning to a sublime level. This minimal intervention fundamentally changes the way this landscape is being perceived. What we see and what we experience is not an environmental phenomenon, but rather happening in the mind's eye of those doing the looking. Seeing is a normative process. We see in patterns. Things we've learned and memorized in the past constantly help us to decipher the present. In order to relearn looking, we can manipulate that loop and sabotage our patterns. When we had the chance to do a project for the Biennale del Territorio in Lugano, in the southern part of Switzerland, we decided not to build something on the premises of the Biennale, but instead to expand the perimeter of the Biennale into the city. We tried to rediscover the urban space without physically changing anything, but overlaying new realities to what we see. Actually, we only changed the sound, and also we added a few fireworks, as you're going to see later. We invited the visitors of the Biennale on a cinematic tour around the city, which works like a movie, except that the images were not moving, but the spectators were moving through the city. Through stories and sounds, excerpts from lectures and books, audio snippets from movies, etc., we created alternative narratives of different existing locations in the city and different spaces. A postmodern square with a step topography and benches and a staircase became a possible skate park. Leftover spaces became an art piece by Gordon Matta Clark, and the university a place for protest and social change. The car park a crime scene, and so on. And what was really interesting and also really powerful as an experience was that through the different narratives and sound, which sometimes referred to the history of a place and sometimes just related to a specific place in terms of its, let's say, spatial qualities, we could really compress time and space. Sometimes you could really experience two different times in one place. We could really enact things. Or we could make two locations present in one space. So by augmenting reality through a staged soundscape, we created a physical elsewhere, a place that appears and might also disappear.
I'm just interested to see how narrative creates physical, natural, new territory, an elsewhere. This is an elsewhere. It's not so much Antarctica, it's an elsewhere. This place is an elsewhere. This place appear and might disappear. I'm very interested about this fragility, this intermittence.
On the one hand, it's connected with an idea of truth. On the other hand, it's connected with an idea of invention, imagination, lies. The imagination runs riot.
Interventi sul posto, abbiamo chiesto in un primo momento di spegnere la musica, questo non è successo perché siamo intervenuti sul generatore, questo ha scatenato la reazione dei credenti, abbiamo utilizzato in un primo momento lo spray utilizzato per cercare di separare i Nestled in the sunny mountains near the southernmost tip of Switzerland is Lugano, city of beauty. Located on Lake Lugano, the city is surrounded by some of the most picturesque villages in southern Europe. Warmed with a brilliant sun, the visitor may decide to spend hours in this one spot, enjoying the wonders of the Swiss landscape.
Finding space has become more and more difficult, especially green space, space for recreation, and space for play. Now, often the space that does exist is leftover space, small spaces, between buildings, behind shops. It's often in-between space, useless space that only exists as a consequence of a number of useful spaces that come together.
The first thing really to understand about skate parks is they're not sports facilities. Nobody here is winning, nobody is trying to beat each other. And they're really community spaces where people come and hang out, challenge themselves, be with their friends. They're places where people of all ages, different backgrounds come together. And in my mind, they're one of the world's great kinds of public space.
The majority begin to desire a radical change in the university. A minority begin to agitate for a radical change in society.
Current urban economy will probably lead to the replacement of this very structure with profitable residential or office buildings. But maybe its programmatic obsolescence might offer the chance for an overturn in the tragedy of commons. The built infrastructure of the multi-story car park as a gigantic mesodomino fulfills the modern dream of continuous generic space.
So that's actually exactly what we tested, this hypothesis. We tested it in Zurich and tried to consider the parking as architecture of social existence and not only as a problem of storage, what it is right now. It's a quite pressing topic. Zurich, like many other cities, is facing an inverted traffic problem. Today's changes are not caused by bringing cars into the city, but rather by getting them out of the city. This is the 70s, when highways were supposed to run into, across, and through cities. The speed of the car compressed time and space, expanded the notion of the city, and propelled the idea of a life beyond spatial limits. The image on the left captures a protest against the construction of gigantic traffic infrastructures, such as the one you see on the right, that would ultimately always lead to the demolishing of many houses and the displacement of less wealthy people. This was also the first time squatting occurred in Zurich as a practical strategy against the housing shortage and high rents. Still today, traffic projects cause the biggest social changes within the city. This is an image taken in 2015 during the so-called Reclaim the Streets protest in Zurich. Even though today it is about pedestrian zones and tempo 30 roads, on a meta level, both ideologies, the celebration of the car, as it was the case in the 70s, and its disappearance today, they both result in segregation, demolition, and displacement. Ironically, they have more or less the same impact. And it's true, the disappearance of the car comes with a reversed image of the city. There is a drastic shift happening towards a nice, soft, green, and user-friendly image. As the city becomes more safe and comfortable, the last spark of some kind of a dirty, adventurous urbanism seems to vanish. And I'm quoting Koolhaas again, "A new universal trinity is shaping the urban space: comfort, security, and sustainability." End of quote. This new trinity produces a controlled, flattened, and mostly exclusive environment in terms of who is using the space, but also what it is being used for. In other words, when it comes to gentrification, traffic always plays a very decisive role. One example of radical social change happened in this street here. From 2007 onwards, the Weststraße, the West Street in Zurich, it was formerly known as the nation's exhaust, became a neighborhood street with a 30 km/h speed limit. Where once huge trucks were crossing the city, there is now a low traffic area mostly used for pedestrians and cyclists. Of course, not only the speed of the vehicles has changed, but also the renters, the size of their apartments, and their newly renovated facades. Slowing down the tempo resulted in some kind of a high-speed gentrification. Where once a lot of people with really diverse cultural backgrounds lived on a fewer square meters, is now home to fewer people with much more similar social backgrounds and bigger apartments. As the paradigm shifted from the city of high speeds and long ways to the city of short distances and high accessibility, we're not only confronted with a kind of brutal beautification, but also with a new type of ruin, the parking garage. And it's precisely that typology which is completely opposed to the soft image of the city. Parkings are somehow the evil twin of comfort. They're cold and bleak, and they don't fit the green new image of cities. They're non-places, places without a self, as Sloterdijk would say. One never goes to the parking in order to go to the parking. One uses the parking only to go somewhere else, to go shopping, to go to the theater, and so on. But isn't it its mental absence, its rejection within the social life of the city, and its spatial genericness exactly its potential? In the slipstream of an ongoing moral purification and also politically correct curation of the urban space, the parking garage could become a place of true freedom. Its genericness, an endless testing field for different configurations. The parkings of Zurich could constitute the turning point in the tragedy of the commons. As a spatial continuum that is accessible by large ramps, the parkings are part of the street space and could also become part of the urban landscape, almost like a piece of topography. As a built infrastructure, these open structures contain a huge potential for the city. Like the Fun Palace, the parking could host programs which would otherwise be hard to realize in the city and which could even trigger maybe social change. Temporary uses, art spaces, uses in intermediate climates, or also alternative forms of dwelling and working. As an attempt to test such alternative program and to rethink those existing surfaces, we turned the parking in the western part of Zurich into a domestic landscape. So basically we just filled the car with furniture and we entered the parking and we stayed for a bit. For a moment, this was probably also the most radical apartment in Zurich. Our search for alternative ways of dwelling has started a few years earlier already, when we founded our office and when our first child was born. It was for pure necessity that in order to find a place to live in the city, we had to look beyond the housing market in Zurich. Besides the horrendously high rental prices, the way one is legally allowed to inhabit the space is hermetically defined. You are supposed to either dwell or work. And also shared flats or bigger spaces providing possibilities that would go beyond the model of the nuclear family did not exist and still are super rare in the city. So when we got the chance to rent this factory space, we were legally not allowed to live there, so we had to hide. What you see is the secret entrance through the storage and printing space. As a first intervention, we divided the space with a wall, this red wall in the middle you see, and it was hiding the apartment behind. The concealed door along the facade was, we actually introduced this door later because we realized that the hole that we made into the wall, the secret entrance, we couldn't fit a bed through, we couldn't fit actually any piece of furniture, really, so we realized we had to make another door. And the placement of the door was super beautiful because it kept the length of the facade. So when it was open, you still experienced the full size of the room. We organized all the necessary installations around the only vertical element in the room, this big concrete column, which became the apartment's center of gravity. You see it here. It's really neatly organized, the space that was just for photography. So that was looking back to the secret entrance through the wall. On this infrastructural column in the middle, the bathroom and the kitchen became one. We even had a bathtub, everything we need. It was really low-key and minimal. But having no rooms was great. You could do two things at the same time, like cooking and taking care of kids. The rest of the space, apart from the infrastructure, I wouldn't really call it a refurbishment. It was more some kind of a refurnishment. Nothing had a fixed position and everything was constantly changing. The floor as ground were replaced furnitures as objects. There was no division between sleeping, eating, showering, reading, and so on. And on a certain point, we could also host 30 people for a movie screening or a dinner. This kind of flexibility and sense of community is almost impossible to achieve in a domestic space. For us, the office home appeared as an antithesis to the now so omnipresent home office. It is an inversion of the current modus operandi. Instead of moving into a fully installed apartment and paying a lot for everything that is already there, which is the Swiss standard, we inhabited an empty space for little money and only installed what was really necessary. But Swiss reality literally is really the complete opposite. Still today, the dream of the majority of Swiss middle-class families is to live in a single-family house. I think it's almost every third person in Switzerland that lives in a single-family house. It is this very type of housing, often in the form of terraced houses, that is still being reproduced. Even though this is not LA, but Baden, a small town close to Zurich, and not in the 60s anymore, but the here and now. Economically, the terrace house embodies a kind of win-win situation. The investor gets to build the maximum of surface on a very complicated site, which means maximum profit. Yet you give the inhabitants the illusion to be completely alone on the parcel. Because of its topography, Baden is literally surrounded by this kind of housing typology. It is the inside-out building par excellence. The kind of building you may love when you live inside, but definitely hate when you're outside of the building. So the terrace house stands on very shaky ground, and even on a larger ecological footprint. Actually, in Baden, more and more people started to protest against the terrace house. There was even an attempt by the local council to illegalize this type of building. When we had the opportunity to design a temporary restaurant for a very big, famous festival in Baden, we wanted to build the last terrace house of the city, a political project. We specifically chose a site for the house. A plot which was not on the festival area itself, but it was just opposite and also opposite the old town. It was basically the last green field in Baden. Or as the investors would say, a very well accessible site with an unbeatable and unobstructable view. Before the festival started, the wooden poles, the so-called Baugespann, it's a Swiss specialty to announce buildings, also announced our project. And this already created some kind of trouble in town. Oh, sorry. The house was a prototype, a mock-up of a terrace house, a kind of showcase house which could be inhabited by the visitors. It was radically conceptualized from the inside out, some kind of an inverted Potemkin village. The whole energy went to the inside of the house. Outside it looked like a construction site, something in the making. It represented construction. At the same time, it constructed representation. The scaffolding related to the construction activities in the surrounding villages rather than to the other pavilions on the festival, so you were never sure. But everything was paper thin and ultimately temporary. It was a total fake. Everything was fake. The brick, the lamp, the concrete columns, the marble kitchen. It was a house like a stage set. The chimney, of course, non-functional. The brick is just a very thin layer of printed foil. Self-adhesive foil as marble and beer mats as tiles. It had a kidney-shaped pool built as a room. And of course there was a garden, an enclosed space and at the same time an endless forest with an emergency door, you can see it. We used a one-to-one print of the nearby forest, so we created this illusion to sit in the trees. The spaces of the house were organized as a sequence with really clear thresholds in between the rooms. These thresholds, we painted them in black, so they would appear like hard cuts in a movie. Any domestic fantasy could be incorporated in this one single house. And of course, there was an exclusive view over the city for all those who made it. The difference of this house is to its modernistic ancestors is that this house, through its use, was a truly social place. At day, people gathered in a quite civilized way, drinking champagne after the house tour, enjoying the view and taking some selfies. However, the later it got, the more extrovert the selfies became. The architecture obviously propelled some kind of playboy attitude. And every night ended up in some excessive home party, completely crashing the living room. At the end of the festival, the pavilion was completely trashed. The chimney was set on fire, and the house fell into pieces. It literally vanished. The extravagant illusion turned out to be just a fleeting dream. It was maybe the only pavilion of the whole festival that was truly temporary. Only 2 streets further, in Ennetbaden, beyond Baden, a very small village, these extravagant daydreams of the 50s are long gone, and one decided for a rather modest form of living. Here, all damages, every scratch in the equally thin surface is instantly being repaired, but also here, something was just not right. Trapped and locked down within one's own 4 white plastered walls, the desire for beauty and depth arose. And also a new wardrobe was needed. So when we were asked to design that wardrobe in one of the apartments during the first Corona lockdown, we immediately felt that this house and the apartment didn't just need another piece of furniture, but, and maybe for the first time, a real piece of architecture. As a microscopic intervention in the belly of this big economical investor's chunk, we tried to build its antithesis. Literally a piece of perfect architecture, a piece of resistance in this formless building substance. So hidden behind 2 large mirrors, the wardrobe is a loggia. The same way a loggia expands the urban space, our wardrobe acts as a space that opens up towards the living room and forms some kind of a niche. The 2 open sliding doors, they intervene precisely with the existing apartment and reconfigure the space. So we managed to spatially also transform the apartment by just adding this piece of furniture. In this sense, our intervention is both hyper-contextual, but also as a loggia completely alien to its surrounding. While the investor's apartment is determined by the ratio of usable area to floor area, the new architecture is based on the relation of the single parts to the whole. The mathematics of the market are being replaced by the mathematics of beauty. But to what extent is an absolute, ultimate category of beauty valid in a plural, complex present? What if beauty was not a hermetic, self-contained mathematical construct? What if the pure, perfect form is being replaced by the mixed form, by the hybrid? The individual, the undivisible, is being replaced by the divisible entity, the dividual. Collision, blending, the composite and the hybrid might help us to radically adapt existing structures and to spatialize ruptures and traces and complex framework conditions. At Findlingsweg-Derending, that's another very small Swiss village, the client, it was a young family, they asked for an annex, even though the house has already been extended twice when they bought it. But there was very little money, and the new volume with excavation and foundation and structure and isolation and facade would have costed just too much. And the house was surrounded by a quite beautiful big garden, which we didn't want to occupy with just another building. And also the house's interior was a real mess, so we proposed something else. However, we were still really interested in this term of the annex, the anejo. not in the architectural sense of a subordinated building that stands next to the main volume, but rather in its semantic definition. The origin of the word annex comes from the Latin term annectere, which means to take possession of something. This actually reverses the hierarchical understanding of main house and annex. So we figured to rather let the annex annex the house and work on its interior. Extending in this sense means densification and also reorganization of already existing surfaces and rooms. We started to work on the connection of the individual parts of the house so that they would begin to perform together. Every spatial intervention we proposed was based on a type of space that could only exist in dependency to another space, such as a bay window, or a landing of a staircase, or a dormer which can only exist in a roof. In the model image, you see how the bay window extends the living room and connects it with the garden. The continuation of the stair that turns around the corner and connects with the attic. And then finally the dormer as an extension of the roof. On the outside, the extensions or appendixes, they appear only fragmentary, like body parts of an inner organism that burst the limitations of their container. They don't really have their own identity or facade. They merely give a glimpse of what happens inside. All elements were designed for different uses. So the landing of the staircase on the first floor, for example, is also a new study. And also the connection to the attic, and also the connection to the kids' rooms. And it's also a storage space. That's all at the same time. So paradoxically, from the inside, the house appears much bigger than before while becoming actually more dense and also more complex and ambiguous. The window sitting on the outside of the facade extends the living room to the garden as a minimal bay window. The opening of the roof is a study and also part of the stairs connecting the upper floor and the attic. And here you see where the chimney reveals the traces of the former space and the roof shape. But this new spatial density and the programmatic and temporal overlaps, they only happen behind the hedge, you have the feeling, as a private matter on a private lot, so to speak, on this very small house in this very small village. We might think that fragmentation, as a consequence of the urban sprawl, is a purely rural, maybe some kind of a village phenomena. But not at all. In the city, it seems, the hedges are growing just higher. This is Schwamendingen. It's a garden city district in northern Zurich, which has been divided by a major highway. It's a huge highway, just splitting this part of Zurich in two parts. And hidden behind this gigantic hedge that you see, there is a camouflaged 8-meter high and almost 1 kilometer long concrete building, which was put on top of this existing highway. And it's trying to deny its own existence by being actually a hedge, so we don't know. Despite the ambition of making a long park on top of this highway enclosure, morphologically this huge new building intensifies this division of Schwamendingen, and it actually creates a lot of leftover spaces. Schwamendingen is currently undergoing drastic transformations and also a major densification. What you see here in this visualization is the future planning of apartment buildings right next to the enclosure. But the new buildings, it seems, they don't really deal with this monument. This is how the enclosure of the highway looks in section. It's not only a border, but it's also a space where cars move within. And it's also an actual space on top of this highway enclosure. This could potentially become a new urban space. But this space on top, you see it here in plan, is driven by really by contemporary ideology, reflexively covered by greenery. They call it the Überland Park, so the overland park. We remember that the Ticino architect Luigi Snozzi used to say, "A true lawn reaches until the very center of the earth." And this enclosure is not at all water permeable. We think that the specific potential of this building as a new urban space is being lost, as soon as the only ambition would be its disappearance. When the only purpose of urban spaces is our recreation, the relaxing part of life, to which this park refers to, we are forgetting what the city at its core actually is or could be. It organizes uses spatially. The city sets places in relation to each other, transforms independent structures to a larger whole. Organizing, putting things in relation to each other, also means confrontation and friction. But the more tension, the more energy. A real city needs conflicts, because in a real city, different ideas exist simultaneously next to each other. That's where the city takes its energy from. We believed that the highway enclosure could create a lot of productive chaos from this tension. It could act like a magnet and become the new centrality of Schwamendingen. Instead of dividing, it could actually be connecting the neighborhoods, physically and programmatically. In this context and reality, we have been working together with our friends from Do Studio, it's another small office in Zurich, on an open competition by the city of Zurich for the biggest school building in Switzerland. The new school complex was supposed to replace some existing school buildings on this large black perimeter you see in the scheme. The plot was really beautiful, already because of its sheer scale. Apart from a few existing school buildings, it was quite empty, with large open lawns and really old trees. It was really beautiful. We realized that the new school building, with its sealed outdoor sport surfaces, would cover most of the parcel. The current landscape qualities would just be lost. With Schwamendingen being dramatically densified and losing its former character of a garden city, the figure-ground relationship is being reversed. The emptiness of the existing plot with its unique quality, we believe, should really be even enhanced. But what struck us the most was the vicinity and coexistence of these two major construction projects. So on one hand, it was the largest school building in Switzerland, and on the other hand, the biggest concrete structure, happening without creating any synergies, as a planner would say. And I mean, they are just a few 100 meters apart from each other. And both constructions were obviously contradictory to their formulated objectives. Even though praised as a connection and camouflaged as a big hedge, the highway enclosure divides Schwamendingen even more, remaining a kind of dead concrete carcass in the city. And according to the brief, the new school complex should strengthen the qualities of the outdoor spaces, the green spaces, while paradoxically requesting 3 times as many square meters than the existing school building on site. So what we did was we simply switched programs. We switched their location. The black sites on the drawing, they mark all the city's parcels along the enclosure. So this long enclosure, it's 1 kilometer. So the city, they had quite much land along this enclosure. So we moved the school complex right next to the highway. Through this move, we could redefine the enclosure not as a fake park, but as a truly urban strip. In exchange, the former schoolyard becomes a vast public park. The school building merges with the highway enclosure and becomes part of it. It's not an object anymore, but becomes part of a larger infrastructure. We understand our proposal as some kind of a prototype for developments along the enclosure. Because of the different levels, the existing ground floor of Schwamendingen and the new level of the strip higher above, we mainly worked in section. The whole building was really about connecting all these levels and also beyond. Programmatically, we densified the school with diverse public programs and a big housing slab on top. It became a even more hybrid and also more public building. The blue hour is the densest time of the day, when day and night are equally present. It's the moment when everything seems to be possible. And on the former schoolyard, once the school has moved into to the new strip, the buildings become ruins, and they become open for new things to happen. It would be Zurich's largest public space, a really vast public park made of layers of time, where remnants, foundations, and nature are equally present. Another park we did encounter in Zurich, this is the last project I'm going to talk about, was at Triemli, which is the city hospital of Zurich. The ZAS, this is a group of young architects, are based in Zurich. They initiated a competition questioning the demolishing of 3 former staff towers of the hospital. At Triemli, every piece of ground is at the same time the roof of something else. Roof lights, ventilation shafts, embankments, parking entrances. There is a peculiarly ambiguous feel to the landscape surrounding the hospital buildings and the 3 towers. Despite its modernist ambition of being a generous park, the space between the buildings turns out to be a merely thin green layer covering a monstrous basement, potentially combining all buildings on site. However, like organs without a body, none of these buildings establishes a true connection with the surrounding, depriving them of any sense of publicness and urbanity. This paradox becomes the project. We proposed a continuous infrastructure connecting and activating existing below and above ground spaces. Beyond the binary understanding of inside and outside, the borders between city and landscape blur. As we ponder the future of the 3 towers, we look beyond them. Linking what was formerly isolated is an operation which focuses on the space between buildings and existing rooms, a parameter generally ignored by those fetishizing the architectural object. Yet this negative space probably offers the greatest potential to transform the city hospital and its 3 towers into a living environment, a place of confrontation and non-canonization, allowing for a multitude of activities and encounters, a place open to the public and open to the city. This connecting infrastructure unveils a new type of urban landscape, which can be experienced as a continuous sequence of open and enclosed spaces. A specific and heterogeneous body composed of what was already there, once resting in pieces and now truly connecting Triemli with the city of Zurich.
I did, yeah, big time, thank you. I can show you around. That'd be great, thank you.
It's not true, boss. I'm as adventurous as the next.
Your wife has an excellent practice. It's easier. I always have busier fast
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Céline, for the wonderful lecture. I think we can leave this light and not turn on the lights now. We have a really nice glowing moment for questions. I thought it was a really good introduction, Thomas, because the word that I remember the most was the sensibility, the merging of a sensibility, and I think this was amazingly present in the lecture. The sensibility, the way of presenting the projects, your sensibility towards image, discourse, history, poetry, drawing, amazing, the way of seeing the world. Well, I don't know if anyone has a question or comment to start or to break the ice. Personally jaw dropped by the discourse and the beauty of the lecture. So not with a lot of questions right now.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you so much.
Please. No, I think the beginning and the ending of the lecture with regards towards modernity, of this idea of impossible to find truth nowadays. Perhaps it would be nice to know a little bit more the position of yourself as an architect in Switzerland. Something we've been talking so much these days, that here cities are still getting built and there's buildings that need to be done and so on. And in this lecture, the normal type of projects, just like showing a competition and a site plan and a program and doing a building and saying, okay, we won, we lost, wasn't present, and perhaps it won't be present again, or perhaps it's impossible for this to happen in Switzerland, or perhaps it's a personal stance you have with your office in regards to the practice of architecture. How do you feel about that? Does it make sense what I'm saying, or not much?
I'm not sure if I get your question right. But I think the situation in Switzerland as a young office starting, I have the feeling it's an extremely luxurious situation compared also with many other parts of the world, like with probably most of the other parts of the world. Because I feel that, we take a very big risk, of course, because no one is waiting for us, like literally no one. And also when you don't have the background that people will come and ask you for things, you have to find glitches in a way. But it's very luxurious in the sense that I know that even if everything fails, I will always find a job still. And I think that's the ground we're standing on when we can work individually or by ourselves. So we can really live and work on the limit, live on all these limits, also maybe of the limits of what we need to exist. Because we always know when we fall, we're going to be carried, or we can help ourselves again. But to be on that limit, to work on that limit, and we have to try to find new ways of seeing what's around us, because we need to find the glitches. We need to find a place where we can act, because it's not on the big stage. We have no voice on the big stage, and we also have to try to become very specific in what we want to say. And I think this is extremely productive as a piece of resistance to try to find these moments of where we can actually say something.
I think this is really fascinating, because the image we have from Switzerland at a distance from magazines and perhaps not paying so much attention is, they have these fantastic buildings with a lot of budget and construction details and so on. It must be great to do a building, but we've been discussing with a lot of different practices here in this space in the last few months or years, like Contemporánea that came a couple of months ago, and it was really interesting that we didn't saw this Swiss perfection. We saw practices that are much more raw, trying to inhabit this tension space that you say, and something that really strikes me about both of them, of your practice at STEM, is that your way of living and your way of practicing architecture are merging. The way you showed an apartment you have with your partner, which is your personal and your professional partner, and you're finding a space to do a project on a storage. It's like the way you practice architecture is the way you are living. And with Contemporánea, it was very similar in the place they had their office for a long time, in a random factory, trying to cut pieces and use them for other works. And that's, I think, completely different from here. And I think perhaps it is because of this that you're saying that here there's much more pressure to go and find work and economic stability, but it's also not a pristine scenario that you're painting. It's a really, there is a roughness to finding the space to work or to finding the possibilities, even in this lucky town that you mentioned. I don't know if anyone wants to join in. Puedo oficiar de traductor para el que no hable alemán o inglés. Pues, acá hay una de la audiencia.
Gracias. Hi, Agustín. Well, first, thank you. I wrote what I wanted to ask you because so many questions. It was a great presentation, and I was amazed by your job. So thank you for the presentation. First of all, just a comment. As a person, I work a lot with audiovisuals and film, and I love the work you presented, especially with video, all the vertical objects, the false perspectives, especially at the beginning in the parking lots and broken buildings. I was really amazed and impressed by that. So thank you for showing that. And the question I had, this proposal or this work you've been doing about, I think you use a really precise and great word, which is dueling spaces, like all these false spaces or leftover spaces. And what you're doing with those is really interesting. How you think this could be applied, or how you think this interacts with the other modern crisis, as I see it at least, that we have which is these new buildings that are appearing, especially in capital cities or big cities, which are basically really small and really expensive and mono spaces and mono apartments with only one space. You show one. The second space you show was where the kitchen was with the bathroom and everything was shared. But I see a lot of buildings appearing which are really at the same time. It's really hard for things like those to appear in those buildings, which seem really white, really neat, really sterilized, if you may. I'm talking about those buildings with 20 square meters where a person has to live with, feels more like a cage than a place to live. And how you think that idea of dueling, again, those spaces could be applied to your work, if you can see something like that happening?
You're talking about the different types of crises now also that we're facing in a way. So, there, of course, is the ecological crisis. But someone really intelligent once said that, even if there wouldn't be CO2, we are in a way, we would still be on the really wrong ship because there is so many other limits that we face. So we face very very clear ideas of how we would live together, and this is reaching a limit because we realize we are consuming too many square meters. We're realizing that we limit ourselves in ways of traditional norms and forms of how we live together. We realize that we have a huge problem with segregation, questions of income, questions of poverty, like all these things. There's so many limits we're facing as a society, as a global society. And I think it's really the search of trying to find new ways of how we could inhabit this planet. It's like very big speaking, I know, but I think it's the scope where we can work, you know, where we can find this freedom of trying to find and also test these new ways of living or these new ways of inhabiting. It's really, really the small moment, and that's maybe also going to what Javier said before. We have to take it very serious, I feel, and we have to be very close to that question. And I think that it's extremely productive also to take those things very literal and to see what happens once we overlay programs, once we overlay the inside and the outside, once we start to question all these limits, once we start to question what the facade can be, what an entrance can be, what a shower is, and so on, what it means once it's confronted with a kitchen, once it's confronted with a sleeping area, and so on. I don't know if that's like the question you're asking, but I think you know, all these big topics, they really materialize in the very small point, and that's also where we can act, and where they become productive and not just killing us, like because they're so heavy, you know. I'm not really sure if I got your question right.
No, yeah, of course. Thank you. Yeah.
Just yeah.
Questions, comments?
If not, I think we can call it a night, and tomorrow continue with Jacob's lecture, and on Friday with Thomas. So thank you, Céline, and thank you everyone for coming.